Thanks everyone for joining us today for this local administrative advisor webinar. We've got 33 attendees right now online, and I think we're going to have some more join in a little bit later. My name is Liam Threlkill. I'm a policy analyst and program manager at the Utah League of Cities and Towns, program manager being over the local administrative advisor program. For anyone unfamiliar with that still, it is a program that offers administrative assistance to cities and towns with a population under 10,000 and an emphasis on those under 5,000 without professional administrative staff. We've got local administrative advisors throughout the state based at their associations of government throughout the state. So we're really excited about that program. We're excited for today. We have Jamie Davidson with us, who's the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer in West Jordan, and who's working on some of this LAA material for us at the League. And he's going to be talking about property taxes and truth in taxation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Liam. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you and to talk about a topic that this time of year is generally something that many elected officials consider, and that is property taxes and what your respective municipality may do with property taxes as you approach a new fiscal year and you start making plans for 2024 and 2025. I've labeled the presentation today, Property Taxes and Truth in Taxation, the Utah Way. Utah is not necessarily at the forefront of property taxes, but years and years ago, Utah was a big part of property tax reform throughout the country. And let me just kind of introduce what I mean by a comment that Governor Cox made several months ago when he talked about the Utah Way. And he represented that Utah is weird in many respects, not weird in a bad way, but weird from the perspective of, hey, we have an open mind. We're open to new ideas, different ways of doing things. That, in fact, is what led us, for example, to developing great things like fry sauce and dirty Diet Cokes, the artificial heart, and ultimately truth in taxation here in the state of Utah. And so today we want to talk a little about, well, what is truth in taxation? Why is it something that came to be back in the 1980s? And how can we, for example, as a municipality, in the event we need to increase property taxes, move through a process that by law will get us to the destination that we would like to be as it relates to increasing our property tax revenues. So what we're going to talk about today is found in the Utah State Code, and I've given you specific references here to the revenue and taxation sections of the Utah State Code. And really, when we talk about truth in taxation and we have a conversation about what it means for jurisdictions like you as a municipality, we're talking about a requirement that municipalities follow specific public notice and hearing requirements when it comes to increasing property tax revenues that they receive. Now, these revenues are exclusive of any growth that you may experience and receive as a municipality. So, for example, we're not talking about the growth of a community and adding new homes, new retail outlets, new industrial projects. But if you need to increase property taxes for your community outside of new growth, we need to follow a process called truth in taxation here in Utah. And really the focus is on a hearing process that increases noticing and public hearing, thereby increasing transparency here within the state with all of your constituents and those that live within your respective communities. So let's just kind of do a brief overview of what we're talking about when we talk about truth in taxation. In Utah, the focus is on collections and not the rate itself. Now, what do I mean when I say that? So when we're talking about truth in taxation, our property tax system is a revenue-driven system, not a rate-driven system. So property value increases for existing properties do not automatically increase tax revenues. There are no windfalls that come as a result of increases in valuations in a respective community. So anytime you as an elected official or an administrator make a decision to increase revenue in your community outside of growth, you have to go through this truth in taxation process. Now, like I said, if you are experiencing revenue growth or revenue increases as a result of growth, you're adding new homes, you're adding new taxable assessed valuation to your community, there's not a requirement that you go through the truth in taxation process. However, if you are looking to do something above and beyond the new growth to cover additional costs, then you would also need to go through a truth in taxation process. So how did we get here? I mean, how did we get to the point where in 2024, we're having a conversation about property taxes and truth in taxation? Utah and the beginnings of property taxes in Utah go back all the way to 1847 when the original settlers came into the Salt Lake Valley, and almost exactly at the point they moved into the Salt Lake Valley, they established a property tax or an ad valorem tax. These early leaders recognized that property taxes were probably going to be one of the most, if not the most stable of taxes. You could tax the broadest of bases, and in terms of valuation, you could spread that tax out among many, many individuals, and so it would essentially lend itself to the lowest rate. So really, even 50 years before Utah became a state, we had some semblance of a property tax within Utah. So property taxes are part of what we always refer to as Utah's revenue three-legged stool. We have income taxes, we have sales taxes, and finally we have property taxes. Now, property taxes are the smallest or the shortest leg in that stool, but they are a significant part of our tax structure here in the state of Utah. And as I've noted on this slide, about $4.2 billion annually are collected to help fund the state's public schools, cities, towns, counties, special districts. So property taxes are a key part of our revenue structure as cities and towns within the state. But truth in taxation kind of had its genesis back in the early 1980s. On your screen here is a picture of a gentleman by the name of Howard Jarvis. Mr. Jarvis was a developer back in California in the late 70s, and he is kind of attributed or recognized as being the father of what is called Proposition 13. Now, if you're familiar with Proposition 13 in California, it was a driven initiative led by Mr. Jarvis that amended the California Constitution, placing or limiting a cap or placing a cap on property tax increases in the state of California. And it led to what was in this country identified as a taxpayer revolt. Now, why am I talking about people revolting from taxpayer or property taxes? I need to kind of paint a picture as to how things were in the early 1980s. There was approximately, inflation rates that were hovering in and around 14%. Home mortgage rates were around 18%. And so inflation was at levels far, far beyond where we even are today. And jurisdictions, cities and towns, specifically in California, back in the late 70s, began to increase property taxes in significant ways. well beyond norms. And they were doing that to try and keep up with inflationary pressures that were leading to increases in costs for providing services to all of their constituents. Well, Utah was not immune from that whole situation, albeit we were a few years removed from California. But in the early 1980s, inflationary pressures started hitting Utah very hard too. And we started increasing property taxes in significant ways. And in 1981, excuse me, the state legislature essentially passed a cap on property tax increases that would allow or only permit municipalities to increase property taxes essentially 6% above where they were the previous year. And so we developed what was called the 106% limit. And that was helpful, but at the same time, it remained problematic because revenues were only, by property taxes, were only permitted to increase by 6%, yet we had ongoing inflation that was still north of 10%. And so even at that point, we weren't able to cover the growing cost of providing services. But that was intended to be kind of a step towards managing what many saw as property tax increases that were too large or to some degree getting out of control. In addition, in 1982, as kind of an additional measure by way of a constitutional amendment, the state adopted by a vote of the people, it was a 2-to-1 vote margin, and you can understand why, the people approved by constitutional amendment a 45% taxation exemption on the fair market value of a residential property. So if you had a primary residence in Utah, you were not taxed on the full value of that residence. You were only taxed on 55% of that value. Now, the constitutional amendment in 1982 was written in a way where it allowed the state to to adopt up to a 45% exemption. Well, that 45% exemption has been in place since 1995. So while it started at less than 45%, since 1995, it has held at that 45% limit. So that kind of gives you an idea as to where we got with truth in taxation. Well, after 1981, after 1982, these continued inflationary pressures, local jurisdictions, cities and towns continued to face the struggle of, look, we're capping property taxes, but we still don't have enough to provide services. And as a result, what do? Well, what we did was come up with a plan recognized as truth in taxation. And so back in 1985, we saw the beginnings of the state of Utah's truth in taxation law. And it was not necessarily seen as a negative thing back in 1985. In fact, it was recognized as a relief from what was seen as caps that were unrealistic for jurisdictions. Finally, we were in a situation that provided a municipality, a jurisdiction, went through a transparent process, they could increase their property taxes in a way that could meet inflationary pressures and could meet the demands of their community. And they were not subject to artificial caps. So while we today sometimes, I guess you could say, begrudge truth in taxation as a very arduous and difficult process, back in 1985, it was actually seen and recognized as relief from tax laws that limited what jurisdictions could do in essentially putting together the necessary revenue to help them pay for government services day in and day out. So let's talk about, well, how do we calculate a property tax rate? What are the steps necessary in going through a tax increase, a property tax increase process in the state of Utah? Well, it really begins with the county assessor. And in each of your respective counties, the county assessor in May of each year is going to assign values to each parcel within the respective county, the parcel itself, the land, and associated improvements. And they do that each May. And then the county auditor receives that valuation information, and he or she calculates a tax rate. And that tax rate is the rate that is necessary to yield the same revenue that you received the prior year, exclusive of new growth. So again, it's not a system that is based on a rate, but rather the amount that is collected. So as a result, the county auditor then determines that rate, and he communicates that rate to you as jurisdictions in June of each year. And that is what we call the certified tax rate. Now, when property or improvement values are on the rise, then this results in a decrease in the certified tax rate. Or in contrast, if property and improvement values are on the decline, then what you will see is you will actually see an increase in the rate, the certified tax rate. Again, it's not driven by the rate, it's driven by the collection of revenue and what you as a jurisdiction received last year in property tax revenue, exclusive of growth. So thereafter, once you have that certified tax rate, then that new certified tax rate is applied to all of the new growth that you have experienced in a year as a community. Once that process is complete, you as a municipality, a city or town, can accept the certified tax rate as prepared by the county auditor, and you can accept that tax rate as applied to new growth. You can do that and are required to do that by June 22nd of each year with the adoption of a tentative budget. Or if you choose not to accept that certified tax rate, you can choose to adopt a different rate. Now, if the choice is to adopt a different rate, a higher rate than the calculated certified tax rate, then the truth in taxation process is triggered. And you have to go through this process, and the process needs to be completed by September 1st of each year. And what we're going to talk about now is a little bit of the mechanics of how we do and how we move through a truth in taxation process here in the state. But maybe before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the calculation of the rate. So you understand kind of what I'm talking about as it relates to values increasing and certified tax rates decreasing, the addition of new growth, or the actual imposition of additional property taxes.
I had a quick question for you here, Jamie.
Sure.
Jan McCosh, who's in Hideout, she said, we are planning to go through the truth in taxation process this year. We also have a few annexations being evaluated. Is there a limitation on our tax increase that would affect our annexation plan?
I don't believe there is. That's something that we can, Liam and I can research, but I don't believe that there is. And I believe that the certified tax rate would be applied to those new annexed areas. So let's jump into the basics. Now, this is very, very basic. This only relates to one jurisdiction, namely your city or town. So let's take, for example, a residential property. Now, residential properties, like I noted, if it's your primary residence, it's subject to a 45% exemption. That exemption does not apply to commercial or secondary residential properties. So if you have an office building, or you have an industrial property, or you have a vacation home, the 45% exemption does not apply to your particular property. But for the purpose of this discussion, you have, let's say, a $600,000 home in your respective community. That's the market value of the home as determined by the county assessor. You take that $600,000 home, it's subject to the 45% exemption, which essentially carves out $270,000 from that home's value, leaving you with a taxable property value that's subject to the certified tax rate of $330,000. Then you apply the tax rate as given to you by the county. And in this case, it's 0.001499. And that is, like I said, that is the tax rate that you as a municipality, as a governing body, adopt. Now, this could very well be the certified tax rate as given to you by your county, or it could be a different rate based on your willingness to go through the truth in taxation process. But you take that 330,000 times 0.001499, and you end up with a city property tax bill of $494.67. And that is the amount that is found on a property tax notice that a resident receives for and on behalf of your respective community. And that is the amount that is remitted to the county for the purposes of a municipal property tax. Well, let's go kind of a little deeper in this. I want to give you an example. I've just created a new community here in Utah. I'm going to call it Deseret, Utah. This is the first year in existence, and there are 10 homes that are part of this new community, population 100. They are all primary residential properties. Each home is valued, for example, at $50,000 a home. Now, I know that's dramatically less, but bear with me. Governor Cox is interested in building affordable housing. I am building super affordable housing in my fictitious home of Deseret, Utah, and I've built 10 homes valued at $50,000 per home. All of them are primary residences, so all of them qualify for the residential exemption, which leaves me with a taxable value on those properties of $275,000. I have an adopted certified tax rate of 1%. I take that $275,000, I times it by 1%, and the amount of municipal tax revenue that I collect is $2,750 in the first year. Now, in the second year, we are seeing an increase in valuation. So all of a sudden, the homes in Deseret, Utah, my fictitious town, are more desirable to live in, and the market is suggesting they're not worth $50,000. Today, they're worth $60,000. So I go through the process. The county assessor assesses the property, and then the county auditor provides a certified tax rate. So we've increased in valuation by $100,000. All of them still qualify for the 45% exemption. But notice what's happened to the certified tax rate. The certified tax rate has gone down. Again, the focus is not on the rate, but the focus is on the rate and amount collected. So you'll notice year one and year two, the same 10 homes were collecting the same amount of property tax. Even though the valuation has increased, The focus is not on the rate, it's on the revenue. Now, that is a common misnomer in Utah and with individuals who you may encounter, I would say probably with regularity, when they talk to you and express frustration about how their property taxes are increasing because the assessed valuation of their home is also increasing. Well, frankly, the way the state tax structure is formulated, that's not what happens. No windfalls are built or incorporated into the state's property tax system. So even though your assessed valuation on your home may increase 1, 2, even tenfold, a government will not receive or get a windfall from that increase in valuation. What will happen is, as the valuation increases, the property tax rate actually decreases. So let's carry this just a couple of steps beyond that. So now we're into year 3 of Deseret, Utah. This is what I call the growing years. So we're adding 2 new homes. Now the valuation hasn't changed. Those homes are still worth $60,000 a piece, but we now have 2 new homes above and beyond the initial 10 that we had. These are residential properties, they're primary residences, so they're subject to the 45% exemption. So their taxable value, you'll see here, is cut at 45, or it's 55% of value. You notice that the certified tax rate is 0.833. That is the same certified tax rate from the year before because there was no increase in valuation, but we added 2 new homes. So that value, that certified tax rate is now applied to those 2 new homes, generating new growth and new revenue. So the tax revenue that we had last year of $2,750 has actually grown another $550 because we have added 2 new homes to the community. Again, it's not based on valuation, it's based on the rate that is assigned. Finally, let's look at year 4. Things are really happening in Deseret right now, and we're adding a commercial gas and go property. So we have now from year 3, those 12 homes. The valuation doesn't change. They've remained at $60,000 at home. They all qualify for the residential exemption. That 0.833 still remains the certified tax rate. Then we get to that number of $3299.78. That is associated with the 12 homes that we have, but now we have a new commercial property valued at $200,000. Commercial properties are not subject to the residential exemption. So all $200,000 of that property is subject to the certified tax rate. We apply the certified tax rate, 0.833, to the new commercial property, and that new commercial property generates another $1,660 in property tax for the jurisdiction. So can you see how the growth in the community in terms of valuation is not adding to revenue? It's purely the growth in new development that is adding to the revenue. So why do municipalities use truth in taxation? Liam, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. We got one from Mayor Fitton here in Far West. He said, can commercial rates be different from residential?
No, they cannot. So why do municipalities use truth in taxation? Well, the reality is many communities consider truth in taxation because Utah property tax laws do not consider inflation when calculating the certified tax rate. So even though your costs as a jurisdiction are increasing, there is no inflationary factor built into a property tax rate. So there's no means for you to recoup for the additional costs that you are incurring to operate your municipality. So, for example, the cost of, I mean, you can just pretty much point out anything in recent times. I'll just use the example of public safety. To equip a police officer in 2024 is more expensive than it was in 2023 or 2020. But the way the tax system is structured, there's no way to accommodate any sort of inflationary increase. So you have to work off the same certified tax rate that you had unless you go through a truth in taxation process. So really, truth in taxation is not something that was put into place to limit what a jurisdiction can do in terms of increasing property taxes. It was put into place so that communities would have to think judiciously about increasing property taxes, and they would have to do it in a measured and transparent way. So if you talk to those who are, for example, in opposition to property taxes, what they will say is, look, if costs are increasing, we're not opposed to considering increasing taxes to cover those costs. We just want it to be a thoughtful process. We want a voice in that process. And we think that elected officials and communities should be held accountable in a very public way if they choose to consider increasing taxes, property taxes. So I'm just going to issue a warning here. Municipalities that do not periodically consider property tax increases through truth in taxation may find themselves increasing service needs without the revenue to pay for those growing needs. You know, that's just obvious. If your take-home pay is the same today, tomorrow, and in the future, but the cost of living is increasing, you're going to find yourself with a gap over time, and you are going to have expenses that exceed the revenues that you have. And I put down here, most communities cannot pay for goods and services in 2024 with a tax rate that was last changed with truth in taxation in 1986. So I used to work, for example, for a community that did not have a property tax increase for 38 years. It was an untenable situation. Now, it was something that was possible because other pieces of our revenue mix were essentially providing everything that we needed. We had strong sales tax growth. We had strong growth in other areas of our revenue stream. But we got to the point, based on a difficult economy, where we had to increase a property tax. And it was very difficult because it was not something that we had done in 38 years. And oftentimes in circumstances like that, what happens is a jurisdiction will go from needing a few dollars by way of a nominal property tax increase every few years to needing a dramatic increase in property taxes to make up for 10, 15, 20 years of trying to go without adjustments to a property tax. So I would encourage you to just be mindful that the cost of government services aren't decreasing, that inflation matters, and that it is prudent to carefully consider when to visit with your public about a property tax increase, and to recognize that that opportunity and that structure is available to you if you so choose. So let's talk specifically about the nuts and bolts of a property tax increase under truth in taxation. This information that I'm providing you here, and specifically the table on the right side of your screen, is available online at propertytax.utah.gov. So this is a specific worksheet, or I guess you could say an overview of the truth in taxation process that is specifically available from the state of Utah. And within this worksheet, there are specific requirements that you have as a municipality as it relates to a truth in taxation process. So, for example, the first step any jurisdiction has if they are going to exercise their right to go through truth in taxation is to notify the county auditor of their intent to go through that truth in taxation process. Thereafter, there are noticing requirements. There is a public hearing requirement. There is a requirement that the governing body, a town or a city council, adopt a property tax increase. And finally, there are notification provisions that need to happen with the Utah State Tax Commission in order to formalize a property tax increase within your jurisdiction. So let's break down each one of these requirements. The first one, like I said, is county notification. So if you and your governing body are going to make the decision to go through the truth in taxation process, you need to do that on or before June 22nd. And you as a municipality need to notify the county governing body, the county commission or the county council, and the county auditor, and I've put in parentheses here, preferably in writing, so that there's no misunderstanding of your intent to increase the certified tax rate within your respective jurisdiction. Thereafter, it then becomes the county's responsibility to accept that essential intent, that notification of your intent to consider truth in taxation to increase property taxes, and to provide you with a date and time for you to hold that truth in taxation hearing. Now, the reason that the county is the one that assigns a specific date and time is more often than not, there is more than one jurisdiction within a county that is going to propose an increase in a property tax. And they are charged with calendaring those increases so that, for example, neighboring jurisdictions or a jurisdiction that has an association with a series of cities doesn't hold their truth in taxation hearing at the same time that your jurisdiction holds its truth in taxation hearing. So you as a municipality may be part of a school district, and the school district and you as the municipality are wanting to increase or go through a truth in taxation process. The county is the one charged to make sure that the school district and the city does not hold their respective truth in taxation hearings at the same time. So residents, for example, have an opportunity to attend both hearings if they so desire. So the county is the one who will provide you notice as to when you will schedule that hearing. Step 2 is a notification or a publication that is required for you to let your residents know that it is your intent as a municipal body to go through the truth in taxation process. Now, if 2 or more entities within a county are going through a truth in taxation process in a given year, then the county must publish a combined newspaper advertisement and post that advertisement or that notice on necessary websites that include all the information about all of the truth in taxation hearings happening or going on within a specific county. Now, on the screen here, I've included a notice of proposed tax increase from Utah County. And you will notice that all of the jurisdictions here are proposing, or they proposed, this last year increases to their property tax rates or their intent to go through a truth and taxation process. So you will notice, for example, that Provo City scheduled their truth and taxation hearing was scheduled on August 8th. And the Alpine School District scheduled their hearing on August 8th. That's perfectly appropriate because residents of Provo do not attend the Alpine School District, they attend the Provo School District. So if the Provo School District would have scheduled a truth and taxation hearing, it would have been at a time different than Provo City's scheduled truth and taxation hearing. So you kind of get what I mean when it talks about scheduling and making sure that there are no overlaps. Now, cities have a requirement to publish 2 notices advising their residents of a truth and taxation process. However, if there are other jurisdictions within your county that are also going through a truth and taxation process, then the county is required to publish a notice, and the county's notice can count as one of the 2 public notices that a city or town must publish as related to truth and taxation. Now, I noted here that this must happen at least 2 weeks before scheduled truth and taxation hearings. So this notice went in, and we'll talk about where it is published in terms of a newspaper, but this notice went in 10 days, at least 10 days before August 1st, when Pleasant Grove City was the first jurisdiction within Utah County scheduled to hold a truth and taxation hearing. Step 3 is a county tax noticing requirement. So you will probably recognize that every July, property owners receive what is called a notice of property valuation and tax changes. So the county is required to send to property owners within every city and town, hey, this is what your property taxes are looking like today. By the way, your jurisdiction may be increasing their property taxes through the truth and taxation process. If they do, this is what the amount and the rate would look like. You've seen those notices, and thereafter it will provide you with a detail as to when and where and what time that truth and taxation hearing will be held within your respective community. And that is something that is required of every county in the state. So a couple of things about that specific noticing and US cities need to be aware of as it relates to scheduling meetings in and around that truth and taxation hearing process. The only other hearings allowed on the same day as a truth and taxation hearing are budget, fee, and enterprise fund hearings. And any city-town meetings on the same day must end before the scheduled truth and taxation hearing time. So, for example, you may have a budget hearing, provided you schedule that budget hearing at 4 p.m., and it doesn't conflict with the truth and taxation hearing scheduled at 6 p.m., then you are complying with the law. However, if you are scheduling a public hearing on the same day, a land use public hearing on the same day as a scheduled truth and taxation hearing, that is a public hearing that is outside of budget, fee, and enterprise type hearings, and therefore would be an inappropriate hearing, and you need to schedule that on a different day. And then finally, as you will notice, all truth and taxation hearings must be held before September 1st. And that is more a function of the county assigning you a date and time than you assigning yourself a date and time. Liam?
Yeah, we had a question in here earlier from Sean Lewis, who's the city manager. down in southern Utah. He said, have the notification publication requirements shown in the chart changed with the 2023 changes to public notice requirements as passed by the legislature?
What I am referencing is the 2023 laws, what was passed in 2023. If there are additional changes that took place during the 2024 legislative session, then those changes will probably go into effect in May, and so are not reflected in this presentation.
Awesome.
So let's go to the next step if I can. I just want to, this is an example of a property valuation and tax change notice that is sent out. In this case, it was sent out by Salt Lake County. This is a particular, I just highlighted Sandy City. Last year, they scheduled a truth and taxation hearing. You'll notice the first column on the table shows if tax increase is approved, it shows essentially the proposed new certified tax rate, a new amount that would be generated based on the value of your home. The next column identifies, hey, if there wasn't a change in the certified tax rate from last year, this is what the amount would be. And then it essentially sums up the difference and says, yeah, it represents a $40 increase in your tax or a 15% increase in your property tax amount. And you'll notice that it identifies the hearing, date, time, and location. Okay, step 4. Again, another publication requirement. This is the first publication in the event you are the only jurisdiction within the county that has scheduled a truth and taxation hearing. So that is going to require you to coordinate with the county to determine if there are other jurisdictions that are going to go through the truth and taxation process. Again, if there are other jurisdictions that are going through a truth and taxation process, this is not a requirement for you. That noticing, that first noticing requirement is met by the county notice that is sent out. And then, of course, the advertisement needs to be 2 weeks before the scheduled truth and taxation hearing. So again, that same requirement applies to the county notice as it does to the city notice. Okay, so what does the notice need to say? These are the specific requirements taken out of state code. So I'm not going to read through them, but I'm going to suggest to you that they are very specific to the point where the advertisement needs to be no less than a quarter page in size. It can't use a typeface that is smaller than 18 point, and it needs to be surrounded by a 1/4 inch border. And it shall not be placed in the section of the newspaper where legal notices and classified advertisements appear. So again, there are very specific requirements. I will also note that the advertisement needs to be placed in a newspaper and a publication of general interest. So if you are into model trains and your county has a, model train weekly, that is probably not the newspaper publication you ought to be aiming for when you're publishing a truth and taxation notice, because it is not a newspaper of general circulation. You're probably shooting more for a weekly or a daily newspaper that includes everything from news, weather, sports, classified, so on and so forth. I think you understand what I'm talking about. Here is the language that is specifically in state code that is encouraged that you follow. So this is the specific language that the notice will include. So in this case, you could say the name of taxing entity. The town of Deseret is proposing to increase its property tax revenue. the town of Deseret tax on a, and then you follow it. And this is a process that is specifically included on a website. You can fill and are required to fill it out on a website that is provided by the state of Utah. And I will give you that specific address here in a second. So I talked to you, this is an example of a proposed tax increase notice for Heber City. You will notice the size of the typeface. You will notice that the language is very consistent, exactly consistent with what was on the previous page. You will notice the 1/4 inch border in and around the advertisement. And you will also, if you were to look into the newspaper, the Heber City newspaper that this was published in, you would have noticed that it wasn't tucked in with the classifieds or the legal notices. Maybe it was on page 6, talking about, you know, the Wasatch High School win over Summit High School in basketball, or whatever the situation was. And you can get an outline and a template for this by going to taxrates.utah.gov. And this is where you will fill your form in, and it will spit out something much like this that you can use for publication. Okay, additional advertisement requirements. There are additional public noticing requirements that can and should be made as part of a truth and taxation process. There are obviously public notice websites that you typically post municipal information to, utahlegals.com, the county website, city town website. I don't think you can err on posting it on too many websites. Again, the focus is on transparency and getting the word out. And so I would just encourage you to take full advantage of the electronic resources that are also available to you as you advertise this truth and taxation process. So we come to the second publication requirement. Again, we talked about if you're the only jurisdiction, you have the responsibility to publish the first notice. If you are one of many jurisdictions in a county, the county takes care of the first notice. However, you as a jurisdiction are responsible exclusively for the second notice, regardless if the county is going to run a second notice. So you can take advantage of the first county notice and count it as one of your notices, but you have an obligation on your own to publish a second notice. That second notice must run at least 1 week before the scheduled public hearing in your jurisdiction. And all copies of your truth and taxation notices, the newspaper advertisements, must be sent to the county auditor and the Utah State Tax Commission, essentially as part of the truth and taxation process and proof that you have complied with the state law. So you've reached the point now where you've conducted all of the advertisements, provided all of the noticing, and you're getting to the point of the day of the public hearing. So you as a city or a town holds the public hearing on a certain date and time, like we've been talking about. The public hearing must be held after 6 p.m. After the public hearing, the proposed tax increase may be adopted by the governing body as part of the city or town's final fiscal year budget. So there's not a requirement if you have a desire to hold a truth and taxation hearing because you're considering an increase in your property tax. There's not a requirement that you actually increase the property tax. But if you are to increase the property tax, then you are limited to whatever you suggested would be the ceiling on the amount of the tax that you advised and essentially notified the county that you were going to do. So if you said we're going to increase property taxes, we're going to propose increasing property taxes by 15%, you can't on the day of the hearing say, well, we're going to increase them 22%. 15% is the cap. Now, if you choose, you can increase taxes to a lesser degree. Let's say you notified everybody and said a max of 15%, but you only want to increase 5%. You have that flexibility as a governing body. You will be required to adopt that certified tax rate on the date of the public hearing and a proposed tax increase. So you would do this generally by ordinance or by resolution. After, you would have the requirement then to fill out what is called the PT 800. This is the form that is required to be sent to the Utah State Tax Commission, notifying them of the increase that you've had in the certified tax rate. And this form is specifically available at propertytax.utah.gov. So you hold the public hearing, you make a decision, you notify the tax commission of the decision, and you move forward. I've included here just another list, kind of a checklist that you can work through as a jurisdiction to make sure you've checked all the boxes as you go through the truth and taxation process. So again, this is also a resource that's available to you at propertytax.utah.gov. Liam.
Quick question here online. Is there a maximum increase allowable in 1 year?
Well, there are specific limits in terms of property taxes that are in state code, but generally there is not a limitation. So if you wanted to increase your property tax, for example, 200%, you generally have the flexibility to do that. Now, I think obviously many would be taken back by a 200% increase. So my counsel and my encouragement would be to focus on what is needed and to build your case around what is needed, what is not necessarily just wanted. I know there are some jurisdictions who may say, well, hey, if we're going to go through the struggle or the challenge of requesting 5% increase, well, maybe we should just request a 15% increase instead so that we won't have to do this again in the future. That's something that you could do, and as a governing body, you have the discretion to do that. At the same time, I would represent to you that there is accountability that you have to your constituents, and they are going to be asking where this money is going to go, and they're going to want firm answers as to where that money is going to be spent. So I would encourage you to be cautious about the increase that you are proposing. Now, I have seen, and this state has seen situations where there have been 20, 30, 40% increases. Generally, those are jurisdictions that have not increased their property tax rate in many, many years. I hope that helps. So finally, let's just kind of wrap things up with this fictitious town of Deseret. And we, as a town, decided this current fiscal year that we were going to go through the truth and taxation process. So we're coming up to budget time. We recognize that we're not going to have everything that we need, and we're going to go through a truth and taxation process, and we're going to propose a 20% property tax increase in the town of Deseret. We don't anticipate that the values of our homes are going to change, and we don't anticipate any new growth in our community. So this is going to be a straight 20% increase. So we go through the process, as I've kind of outlined here in the last few minutes, of notification, working with the county, communicating, holding the hearing, and then communicating after a vote of the governing body is taken to increase the property tax. And this is what it looks like. So you'll recall above, the certified tax rate before the property tax increase was 0.833%. Now we're going to increase it 20%. So that certified tax rate after truth and taxation goes from 0.833% to 0.9987%. So we have increased property tax revenue from $4,959 to $5,952, or 20.01%, an increase of $992. So as I leave you today, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you about what you or your jurisdiction can do, or if you have additional questions. I know Liam is a fantastic resource as well, but I thank you for your time, and I wish you the best this year during your municipal budget process. And in the event you are considering a truth and taxation property tax increase, I hope you will find the resources that we have provided you today helpful. So thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jamie. That was awesome. That was really fantastic. For anyone that's curious, yes, this will be posted online. It'll be on our YouTube page, and it'll also be on our ulct.org/LAA webpage. So look for that. We have other spring training resources that are online as well: land use, transportation, general government, 3 different webinars there that you can watch as well. And we've got our mid-year conference in 2 weeks from now. So hopefully I will see you all there. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. With that, thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.